From the WNIN Tri-State Public Media Center in downtown Evansville, I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street. Okay, was Bull Island, the rock festival, the worst ever? Well, 50 years later, we look back at the 1972 event in southwestern Indiana, the so-called Woodstock of the Midwest. Thousands, then tens of thousands of young people converged on a stretch of farmland along the Wabash River on the border of Indiana and Illinois, just north of Evansville near the small community of Griffin, Indiana. First called the Erie Canal Soda Pop Festival, then the Labor Day Soda Pop Festival. The name that stuck was the Bull Island Rock Festival. I was there as a young reporter along with my 2 guests, Lynn Wells, also a reporter, who ferried me to the site in a John boat. Remember that, Lynn?
Oh, absolutely.
Also here is author Dan Davis, who recalls his experiences in the book, The Bull Island Rock Festival, aptly named, of course. So welcome, guys. It's been 50 years since the music and mayhem of Bull Island, and we all have our stories to share. So Dan Davis, let's start with you. You went to the festival with a friend, leaving Zionsville for a 3-day adventure and returning home almost unrecognizable, dirty, hungry, and seriously ill. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Well, tell me about how seriously ill were you?
I wasn't feeling really good when I went to Bull Island. And then, of course, it rained a large portion of the time when I was there. And when we left, we hitchhiked back, and every ride we got was in the back of a pickup truck. So it just made things worse. And so by the time I got back, I was in bad shape, and I ended up being taken to the hospital for 2 or 3 days.
And you tell in your book that you were left alongside the road?
My buddy, I couldn't walk anymore, and we were almost home, and my buddy kind of parked me under an overhead bridge and put a sleeping bag over me, and he walked to get help. And he said he knocked on a few doors, but of course no one's going to answer the door. It's this long-haired guy, dirty, it's probably smelled pretty good too. And luckily, my sister saw him walking along the road, and she picked him up and drove back and got me. And by then, I'd gotten up, and apparently I was walking down the side of the road with the sleeping bag draped over me. Oh. And she took me to my parents' house, and they took one look at me and took me to the hospital, and I had pneumonia.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah.
So how old were you then?
19.
19, yeah. Okay. And man, I bet they were not too pleased with the situation.
They weren't happy that I went anyways.
Oh, boy. And this confirmed all their worst fears.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. Now, Lynn Wells, of course, a veteran journalist working for news outlets in Indiana and Illinois. So back in 1972, were you living in Grayville then?
I was living in Grayville, and I was working at the Mercury Independent newspaper, a little weekly newspaper there owned by the Seal family. And I had a second job at the time. I was a Grayville City police officer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So I had 2 jobs. I worked at the newspaper, and I had worked as a patrolman in the evening. And so that's when I first caught wind that Bull Island was coming. I had a friend of mine by the name of Henry Kionka, who was an Illinois State Trooper. And by the way, his family's from Evansville, the Kionka family. But anyway, Henry and I were talking one evening, and he says, I'm hearing some things about a big festival that's coming, Bull Island. And he said, this isn't right. He had actually gone down there and talked to the promoters and so forth and so on. And he was the first one to really sound the alarm that something big was coming. And what he discovered then, I think, caused some folks in Indiana to file some suits and so forth to get this stopped before it ever started. So I know there were some lawsuits filed or some motions filed in court in Indiana to stop this festival from ever happening. And that all started with Henry Kionka finding out that he saw a bunch of activity going back that way, even though it's in, you can only get there through Indiana, it's in Illinois, but he knew what was going on, and he smelled what was happening and tried to sound the alarm that this may not be something that this area needs, if you know what I'm saying. So there were some courts in Indiana to try to get it stopped.
Right. Now, so exactly where is Bull Island, guys?
He can tell you a lot better.
Okay. I know you have maps in your book.
Yeah. It's on the Wabash River, and the town north of it is Griffin, Indiana, and it's a piece of land on the Indiana side of the Wabash, but it belongs to Illinois. And that was part of the reason they picked that spot, because of all the counties that were filing injunctions to stop the festival.
So it was no man's land.
It was no man's land.
Right.
And what was funny about that was they started, when they found that piece of land that belonged to Illinois, they started setting it up before they even contacted the owner.
And that's what Henry Kiyonka was seeing, some activity. He knew something was happening.
Yeah.
The trooper.
Yeah, and they were starting to build a stage
Right.
and drilling water wells. Well, then the man that owned it, his name was Irvin Hagedorn. He lived in St. Meinrad. And he went to them and said, you can't be building on my land. And they said, well, we'd like to purchase your land. And they put $10,000 down on it, and the final price was supposed to be $200,000. So by then, they had the okay to keep going. But there were 200 people there before he even knew about it.
Really?
Yeah.
So was this farmland?
Farm and pasture, yeah.
Farm and pasture,
Yeah.
okay. And Bull Island is, it's really in your neck of the woods there, Lynn. I mean,
I had
did
never
you know of it?
I did not. Had no idea what it was or anything about it until this happened. Until I heard from Henry Kiyonka something was going on. I'd never heard of the place, never been there, had no reason to go there, and it wasn't easy to get to from Grayville except by boat.
So it wasn't really a known location.
Absolutely not.
I
Absolutely
wonder how it
not.
got its name, Bull Island. I guess the grazing of bulls. I don't
Cattle,
That, yes. Yeah,
livestock, I think.
Okay.
know. Okay. Now, so the idea of jurisdiction was a big issue. Who's in charge of this? Who's going to be in charge of the security of this area?
Well, the two guys that put it on was Bob Alexander and Tom Duncan. And Bob Alexander he'd been a promoter for Roy Orbison and the Righteous Brothers, so he'd had a little experience with it. And in June, they put on a festival in Evansville at now I'm pronouncing it right, the Bossy.
Yeah, Bossy Field.
Yeah, I was a bit corrected on that once before.
Yeah, named after Mayor Benjamin Bossy.
Oh, okay.
Bossy Field.
And they had Ike and Tina Turner and Edgar Winter and Black Oak, Arkansas. Had several big names there, and they made $30,000 off of that. Or no, I'm sorry, there were 30,000 people there, and they made quite a bit of money off of that. They made enough money that Alexander ended up taking his family and friends to an island in the Caribbean and paid for everything. So then they got this idea, well, if this was successful, let's do another one. And that's when they started trying to set the festival up in Chandler, Indiana.
And that was a quick turnaround because the one at Bossy Field was in July.
Yeah.
And of course, they're talking about a Labor Day weekend festival.
Right.
So that
It's
was
quick.
That is a quick turnaround for something as massive as they planned.
Yes.
And just the idea of them rounding up all these groups in that short amount of time was incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I understand that, Dan, you researched that the Chandler Raceway was the first choice for the festival?
Yes, yes. And then, but they put a full-page ad out in Rolling Stone magazine, but WLS got a hold of this.
In Chicago.
In Chicago, that's where I heard about it. And when that word got out through the radio station, hundreds and hundreds of hippies started showing up. And they were camping around Chandler. They were camping, I guess, down along the Ohio here. And,
I don't imagine they were very popular in Chandler hippies at the time.
That's what it was. That Chandler didn't want anything to do with it, and that's when they had the county filed an injunction to stop it. And then most of the other counties in southwestern Indiana did the same. Mm-hmm. And now they're stuck with all these people that are here, And,
Here for a festival that isn't going to be here.
yeah,
Right. Of course, we got to look at 1972. The Vietnam War was still going on.
Yeah.
A lot of tension there. A lot of rednecks basically
Absolutely.
didn't like these long-haired hippies coming to town, and so there was some friction there. And yeah, I bet that was something. Now, Lynn, when you learned the festival was going on to be held in your backyard, was the immediate reaction curiosity, anxiety, what?
It was mainly curiosity because, again, nobody knew where this place was. It really wasn't on anybody's map. I mean, in your mind,
But they knew it was nearby.
They knew it was very nearby, but I've never been there. Have you ever been there? No, I've never been there. So it was like, well, it's not here. It's over across the river, which it wasn't. But it was just something that nobody really thought of. It certainly in the Grayville area.
Now, at the time, I was a reporter at WGBF Radio in Evansville, which was the NBC affiliate
Correct.
at the time. I had worked at the Evansville Courier and the Sunday Courier and Press. while studying journalism at the University of Evansville. I had very little broadcast experience and suddenly learned I was going to cover Bull Island for NBC's weekend radio program Monitor, and I had no idea how to get there, and Lynn Wells came to my rescue.
And my brother Steve. My brother Steve had a boat, and we knew that you needed to get to Bull Island, and he had already been ferrying some people back and forth from the Grayville boat dock to Bull Island. Some of them were reporters, some of them were just interested people, and some are just curious folks. But we took you down there for your report, and that worked out pretty well.
It did.
Yeah,
it did.
because it was the easiest way to get there safely, certainly.
And it wasn't very long of a boat ride, was it?
No, it wasn't but 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, I know.
Very, very short boat ride. And of course, when we got there, people are bathing in the river.
Yes.
Like Ron White said, you see one naked woman, you want to see the rest of them. But no, people were just uninhibited, weren't they?
Oh, sure.
People just took their clothes off and jumped in, took a bath or whatever they did. And that's what it was like all along the bank going up to Bull Island.
Logistically, I had to get back after doing my reporting down there. And there were no phones down there, and there were no cell phones back then.
Cell phones didn't exist.
So the nearest phone was at the Grayville Mercury Independent newspaper.
Fighting Billy Seal's desk, the editor's desk.
Was it upstairs?
No, it was on the right in the front door to the right.
Okay, I know.
That should have been at his desk.
So anyway, I kind of had a little cubby hole there.
Yeah. And you're filing reports.
I'm filing reports, and the producer from New York got on the phone and said, Are you ready for the broadcast? I go, yeah, I guess. So I put like Bill Cullen on there, and he was doing the weekend Monitor at that time. Of course, people might remember Bill Cullen as the game show host.
Sure.
Bill Cullen,
announcer,
long-time personality. So he was the guy who interviewed me. So I have vivid memories of being in the Mercury Independent,
which was a musty old building with just paper stacked.
Oh, it was. It was classic old newspaper.
Old newspaper, and the Moose Lodge next door. So.
Now, Dan is the author of the new book about his experiences, and you went with a guy named John, your buddy that you went with?
John Davidson. My grandmother lived on the same block that he grew up on, so I'd see him quite a bit. So I'd known him since childhood, and he was about 3 years younger than I am. Or I was. So
he was you were a teenager and he was a young teenager.
He was like 16 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you kidnap him or what?
No, he was all for it.
Really?
It was an adventure.
Yeah.
So did he get his parents' permission, or did you just?
I doubt it.
He just snuck out.
Yeah, knowing him. Yeah.
God.
Wow.
So you two guys have a wild hair, really, basically. We're going to go down to this place. We don't know where it's at, but we're going to go down there and find it. So what did you take with you, Dan?
We took a pup tent. We had a duffel bag. We stuffed everything in, and we had, I think, 2 cans of Vienna sausages.
Oh, my.
Some crackers, and a couple of canteens.
What else do you need?
That's right.
And very little money. We had very little money between the two of us.
Did you have tickets for the festival?
No. We didn't intend to buy them when we got there, and we walked up to the ticket table, and John noticed that people were walking off to the side and walking into the corn. So we thought, well, we'll try that too. So we stepped out of line, we walked over there, and the fence was all stomped down, and walked right in.
Yeah, as I recall, the ticket area, people just went past it, knocked it over the fence over, and everybody just came in, and so their ticket sales kind of went. Advanced ticket sales were good, I guess, but at the site.
Well, I'm curious. So, if you hitchhike there or you drive there, there's no parking really for the festival. Was there any parking, or do you just?
Everything's pretty well taken. They all parked at Bull Island on the field. Especially the people that had campers and RVs, things like that.
Okay.
But cars were backed up. Well,
onto the interstate.
Yeah.
So people just parked their car on the shoulder and started walking.
Yeah.
And there were literally hundreds of cars lining from Griffin all the way back to Grayville exit.
Yeah, even in the median, they were parking everywhere.
Well, how long of a walk was it from the interstate to the site?
I'm thinking it was like 7 miles.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it's a long way.
So it was a trek.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was like walking from Grayville to Crossville, if that gives you
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it's 7 miles from Grayville to Crossville.
And what I remember about that too is walking in, everybody was all excited. You're going to a concert,
Right.
and everybody's going out. People are dragging along. They were tired, hungry, dirty,
Hungover.
It's a whole different crowd coming out that went in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, the enthusiasm was lost.
Not to mention half the bands that were promoted to be there didn't show up or couldn't show up for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Oh, and you said that it rained?
It rained at some time every day except Monday. That's my recollection.
I understand it. What I remember seeing, it was muddy. Everything was just muddy.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know the food, water, sanitary facilities very scarce at the festival site, and of course that led to frustration and violence. We're going to talk about that in a moment, and also the big acts that did and didn't appear at the Bull Island Rock Festival 50 years ago, guys. That's amazing. So, guys, before we go over the list of the bands that showed up and didn't show up, let's learn more about my guests, Lynn Wells and Dan Davis. So, Dan, in the book, you say you grew up in Zionsville. So, where did you go to school in Zionsville?
Zionsville High School.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And from there, where? Did you go into, what profession did you go into?
Oh, well,
This might be a good story.
I was working on a construction crew right out there, a bricklaying crew at the time. And I ended up going to school in Lamar, Colorado.
Oh, really?
Later on,
Cool.
yeah.
So what prompted you to go to Colorado?
Honestly, I was getting in some trouble in Indiana, and I had a friend in Lamar that was going to school out there, so I thought it was a good time to just get away from everybody for a while.
Well,
There you go.
I mean, that's a story in
Makes sense
itself.
to me.
I don't know how much you will go into that, but anyway. And you returned back to Indiana, though.
I came back to Indiana, and I ended up working for a pipeline company for 40 years.
okay.
Retired in 2019.
Okay, all right. And so what prompted you to write this book?
Well, I'd been interested in trying to think back on Bull Island, and I started doing research on it about 7 years ago or so. And I had folders full of information about it. And I thought, when COVID hit, I'm homebound most of the time, and I started.
A lot of books were written during COVID.
Yeah.
Memoirs.
Yeah, I know it.
And I figured there had to be a book out there somewhere, so I started looking, and there wasn't one. And I looked over my research, and I thought, well, I could probably stick something together. So I kind of made a rough manuscript and started putting things together. And I got permission from the University of Southern Indiana to post the pictures that Sonny Brown had taken there. And I just went from there.
Yeah, in your book you have a lot of
Very colorful.
Sonny's pictures in there.
Yeah.
It's definitely some good stuff. Definitely.
And Sonny was only able really to take pictures as far as the bands. He said he could only get as close enough one time to take a picture of Ravi Shankar, but he never got a picture of anybody else on the stage.
Yeah, that's the only close-up in there, really, of one of the acts.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I'm surprised, too, that there was not a crew there recording this, recording the music.
There was actually a crew en route, and they were on I-64, and they were going to film it, and they got stuck in traffic. And after they sat there for several hours, they said, well, this is enough, and they turned around and went back.
That would have been a tremendous
Oh,
documentary.
my gosh.
Oh, yeah. And there's nothing.
That's a shame that's been lost. And there were some great acts there. So I understand your wife, Deb, played a role in getting this done, too?
Yeah. She kept just telling me to try to put something together. People might buy it, I mean, there was almost 300,000 people there.
Yeah.
The ones that are still alive might
And
wanna
their
read the book.
grandkids.
Their grandkids.
Yeah.
This is what Grandpa and Grandma were doing.
In 72.
My goodness, which was kind of shocking in a way. So now, had Deb been hearing these stories for years?
Oh, yeah. And it's funny because the memories start coming back. I'll forget. There one of them that I didn't put it in the book, but every time there was a pause where no bands were on stage, there was the guy they called the yodeler, and this guy would yodel at the top of his lungs, and everybody could hear him. And I'd forgotten all about that, and somebody jogged my memory on
I
that.
hadn't heard that story.
Did he go on stage and do that?
No, he was in the crowd.
Oh, in the crowd.
In the crowd, he was
He was
yodeling.
doing it loud enough that people could hear him.
And they were probably hooting and hollering for him.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever happened to the yodeler?
Yeah.
Kind of like a Batman character, a yodeler. Oh, boy. Now, Lynn, of course, a veteran journalist, radio and TV personality.
Oh, boy, you name it.
A long list of stuff. Now, Lynn, did you grow up in the Grayville area? Are you
Actually, I was born in White County, which is Grayville's in White County. It's also in Edwards and Wabash, but I was born in Maunee and raised in Carmi.
Kind of like a Bull Island. There.
Yeah, kind of like a Bull Island. Maunee is pretty close to Bull Island, actually. But anyway, yeah, I raised my family in Grayville, and I was living there at the time of Bull Island, of course.
Now, working at the Mercury Independent, probably a lot of great stories there.
Oh, gosh, a lot of stories there. Yeah.
Now, your father-in-law was...
My father-in-law was the...
great character there.
Quite a character, World War II veteran, a fighter pilot. And
was he the fire chief, too?
Oh, he was the fire chief at the time, and I was a city cop, so it was like we ran the town.
Fighting Billy...
Fighting Billy Seal.
Was his
he got shot down over North Africa in a fighter jet. I started to say jet. World War II, a fighter. Bailed out and landed behind enemy lines. And anyway, so he had quite a story. That's why they call him Fighting Billy.
Yeah.
He survived.
And, all these small towns had their own newspapers.
Yeah, and his grandfather started the paper, and then his dad owned it, and then Fighting Billy ran it, and then his son, Patrick Seal. So it was like 4 or 5 generations in this newspaper. And I married into the family at the time, so I worked there for, I think, 9 years, worked at the newspaper before I made the jump, oddly, from newspaper to TV. I usually don't make that jump, but I did. Went from newspaper to TV, and then back to radio, and back to newspaper. And
I know when you worked at Channel 14, you would cover some of the more unusual stories.
Yeah, I was called the Country Traveler. I did a lot of feature stories, and I think that's kind of how I got involved in Channel 14. I was helping set up some of these feature stories for Johnny Mann, who was the traveler reporter at the time, and so then I took his place.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, a lot of interest, and Bull Island was one of the most interesting, for sure.
Oh, in your career. And then you worked for several radio stations. I know you worked at WFIW.
I was at the WFIW. I was
in Fairfield?
Yes, in Fairfield. I was the news director there for 25 years.
Really?
25 years.
And now you have a new gig?
Got a new, well, for a short time after radio, I became the editor of the Carmi Chronicle newspaper for a couple of years, and it folded. Not that way you'd like it to fold, but it went out of business. And then after that, it went out of business at the end of 2021. And so 3 months later, partner and I formed a online website, news website called crimebeat.net. It's a free website, no paywall or anything like that, but crimebeat.net. So I'm covering crime and corruption in courts in several counties in southeastern Illinois.
And you recently were interviewed by the Oxygen.
I had a producer from California came and interviewed me about a murder that happened back in 1995 in Wayne County. She's doing a documentary called Homicides for the Holiday. And this particular murder happened on the 4th of July.
Oh, my gosh.
So that was kind of an interesting thing.
So you're reliving all of these events now.
And before that, I had a Hollywood crew came in and interviewed me about Bruce D. Mendenhall, serial killer from Albion. He used to,
the truck stop
killer.
Yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah, he's awaiting trial right now in Indianapolis.
Oh, my God.
His third murder trial. He's got like 4 more after that.
Oh,
so
grief.
For some reason, they keep coming back wanting to interview me about stuff like this.
Well, you know all this stuff, definitely.
But anyway.
Okay, now back to the
absolutely
50th anniversary of the Bull Island Rock Festival, Labor Day weekend, 1972 in southwestern Indiana. So 2 months earlier, we talked about the promoters, Bob Alexander and Tom Duncan, staged a smaller, successful event at Evansville's Bosse Field, the Freedom and Ice Cream Festival. That was a one-day, 12-hour show featuring an impressive lineup of acts. Black Oak, Arkansas, Country Joe and the Fish, Edgar Winter, John Lee Hooker, and Ike and Tina Turner were actually there, among others. A big crowd. So these guys, of course, they were enthusiastic, and they had this great show in their resume. A lot of bravado. They started lining up these big acts for the Erie Canal Soda Pop Festival. And we said they were searching for a venue. They finally came up with Bull Island. And Lynn, I understand that at Bull Island, there were only 3 White County, Illinois deputies trying to police the crowd.
That is correct.
3 deputies.
3 deputies. That was probably the sheriff and 2 deputies, if you want to know the truth.
That'd be 1 deputy for every 92,000 people.
Oh, right.
And they really didn't do any patrolling. I think basically what they tried to do was if there was an emergency or a crisis, they'd try to get medical help. If somebody was injured or hurt or needing medical attention, that's basically all they could do because they were overwhelmed. They couldn't do any law enforcement, certainly.
Now, Dan Davis, author of Bull Island Rock Festival, so the promoters were able to line up this incredible acts for this Woodstock wannabe. Big names at the time: Black Sabbath, Cheech and Chong, Nazareth, Ted Nugent, Ravi Shankar, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
I mean, how'd they get these guys?
It must have just been Bob Alexander's connections that he had. But that was a really good lineup they had there. They had several bands that didn't show up at all. The Allman Brothers, the Doors, REO Speedwagon, Fleetwood Mac. They were originally supposed to be.
Rod Stewart they were trying to get him.
Well, he did. His manager at least showed up. And then when they saw the conditions of the stage, I guess the stage had about an inch of water on it and electrical cords running through it.
Oh, my gosh.
And they'd already paid him $100,000. But he wouldn't perform. But he did come back a year later to Evansville and performed at Roberts Stadium.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he made good on his contract, so to speak.
That's right. So you were there for 3 days, Dan. What acts stood out to you?
The ones I remember, everybody else seems to remember, Black Oak, Arkansas put on a really good show. And they came in by helicopter. They dropped flyers of visors with their names on them all over the crowd. And then as soon as they got on stage, they ripped their shirts off, and Jim Dandy dunked his head into a bucket of water, and they started performing. At the end of it, they wanted to release White Doves. So they sent some out to find some white doves to release. Well, they couldn't find white doves, so they came back with a bunch of pigeons.
I'm surprised they didn't come back with quail.
Yeah. Anyway. And when they released them, they didn't realize pigeons won't fly in the dark. So they were landing on their guitars and on their heads. And I actually talked to the lead guitarist about that, too. And he told me that was one thing they've always remembered is those pigeons landing all over the place.
And making a mess, too.
Oh, I bet. Well, they may have ended up on somebody's plate, too.
Southern Illinois,
Cooking some pigeons there.
Squab.
Wow. Now, Lynn, what feedback did you receive from your friends about the music there at Bull Island?
To be honest with you, not a lot, because the people I knew that went there really didn't go there for the music. They just went there for the experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
They went there for the experience. A lot of people just went out of pure curiosity.
Sure.
A lot of people from the Grayville area. I got to go down there and see that. I heard there's naked people down there, and that's the truth. A lot of people went down there just to see what this was about, and those were the people that I knew. They just went out of curiosity and not for the bands. Now, on the other hand, my brother Keith decided he was going to, he's quite the entrepreneur. He decided he was going to make a small fortune at Bull Island.
Yeah, big crowd there, hungry
Big crowd,
people.
so he took his camper down there and set it up and selling ham sandwiches because the crowd needed to be fed, of course.
Yeah.
And he.
Now, was he price gouging? Or
No. He was a hippie himself.
Oh, okay.
Trust me, he was a long-haired hippie himself who had served in the Vietnam, not the war, but Vietnam era, certainly.
Okay.
So he knew he was in with the people that he liked, and no price gouging. But as soon as he ran out of ham sandwiches, they set his trailer on fire, and that ended his career selling ham sandwiches.
So he didn't make a killing.
He did not make a killing. He lost money
I'm sure he
with his camp. Probably didn't have insurance on it either, I'm guessing. But
Well, there were other acts of arson
Yes, I
there
believe.
at the festival, Dan.
Yeah.
Some catering truck, I think, was set on fire.
Yeah, and I was there not when it was set on fire, but I had $20 left, and they're selling hamburgers for $10.
oh my gosh,
So, yeah,
that is
In
a
1972.
In 1972, which is high for 1972. And I finally got to the front of the line. They had a table set up there, a long table, and told the girl that was there, I said, I want 2 hamburgers. So she went to get the 2 hamburgers. I got my $20 out, and everybody was grumbling about the prices behind me. And about that time, a guy next to me yelled, "F this, let's take this place." And the table went flying over, and the girl dropped the hamburgers and ran back in the corner with all the other vendors there, and everybody made a rush for the grills. So I thought, I put my 20 back in my pocket. I thought, if I don't go get some food, I'm not going to have any food. So I ran and got a couple of hamburgers, too.
Tell you what, hunger will make you do some strange things.
But later that night, they set the trailers on fire, and you could hear the tires exploding. From the
I'm
heat.
sure my brother's trailer was one of them.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So there was no firefighting equipment out there.
Oh, and you couldn't get any there if you needed to.
People were feeding it. They were throwing wood on it to keep it going.
Keep it going.
Yeah.
A big bonfire.
Yeah.
So here you're a 19-year-old guy and just
Eyes
taking
getting-
this all in.
Eyes are about to have it.
Yeah.
My gosh. And you're not feeling very well anyway.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
what an event. Dan Davis, author of Bull Island Rock Festival, you were there for 3 days, so you can give us a firsthand memories of that. And you described the marshy area along the Wabash River called the
Turd fields.
Turd Field,
Yes.
aptly named, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So were there any portable facilities?
There were 6 porta-johns there, and they filled up in a hurry.
You think?
Matter of fact, people said they'd open the door and they'd look in there and they'd just shut the door because people were still trying to use it after it was overflowing. So they started using the turd fields. They had another spot, and it was the crap ditch. I'll say crap ditch.
Yeah. Well,
And that was,
you know what that is.
And that was the other one, yeah. And the funny thing about the turd field, I couldn't find anybody from my group about the whole time I was there. But the one time I did see a friend, I was in the turd field, and he was squatted down the weeds about 30 feet from me. And
Precious memories.
Yeah, but by the time I got out of there, he was gone, so I couldn't find my group still.
Oh, my.
And so, was there a toilet paper or anything?
Oh,
or?
no. Well, there were some people, one of the bands had dropped some flyers, and those flyers were all over the turd field.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's quite a picture.
The latrine was essentially, in the beginning, was besides the 6 porta potties, was just a trench that had been cut.
That's the ditch.
That was just a ditch.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
And there were some water wells?
They had
or-
6 pumps. They're supposed to be 40, and they had 6. Yeah. And those lines were really long for that.
Oh, I bet. So the frustrated festival goers, of course, they're paying high prices for food, and we talked about they eluded the food trucks. After a while, they just were frustrated. And we talked about the swimmer who was injured by a propeller, and there were a lot of drugs, of course, there. There were some overdoses, but not that many for that crowd, really.
Yeah.
That's amazing that you'd think, because it's unidentifiable drugs, so you don't know what these people are taking.
Yeah, and they had people advertising. There were signs up like it was a garage sale or something.
Yes.
But I guess there was one girl walking around there completely nude, and she was wearing a pizza box, like a loincloth, with the price of the LSD written on the front of it.
Oh, my.
Advertising.
I vividly remember tents with a handmade sign out there for LSD, marijuana, mescaline, whatever mescaline is, and just all kinds of whatever you wanted, you could get.
Yeah.
And I think in your book you say that the announcer at the stage was warning people about certain drugs.
Yeah, I guess some of them were selling bleach, things like that there. So, yeah.
So you don't know what was in these things at all. I think it was like strychnine was in some of this.
Strychnine. I heard strychnine was being sold. Yeah. I walked. They called that Alice in Wonderland Avenue or Drug Alley, and that was the lines of campers and tents. And just had all
And had their little handmade signs up.
Yeah, they even selling specialized pipes.
Sure.
To smoke things in. So, yeah.
Well, as the festival dragged on, 3 long days, conditions deteriorated, and then the fans became more frustrated because some of these groups that they were waiting for didn't show.
And they paid good money to see them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So-
some of them did.
Some of them did. That's what I meant.
And I think the last band was Bang. Was that
yes.
the last?
The only way I've never really heard anybody. Everybody has a different idea of who played last. I've heard the Doobie Brothers played last. The only reason I put Bang in the book was because Bang put out a book about their experiences, and they mentioned that they were the last band.
Now, was Bull Island the worst rock festival ever? Fans did tell their horror stories, but others had the time of their lives. And Bull Island Boogie by White Duck. White Duck performed, and then later, several months later, they came out with an album, and one of the songs was the Bull Island Boogie, Dan.
Yes.
You did a lot of research into all these bands.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot out there, if you really search for it, just nobody put it together. But yeah, I did quite a bit of research.
So, did you collect a lot of albums? And were you a record
Oh gosh,
person?
yes. I still got trunks full of albums. But yeah, there was a band there called Bertha, and it was an all-girl band, and they were really good. And I've still got one of their albums too.
Wow.
Bertha.
Bertha. Yeah.
Never heard of that one.
This was before the Go-Go's or the Runaways, the other
Sure.
girl bands. But they
Bertha.
were very,
Well,
very
I'll have
talented.
to check that out.
Yeah.
So,
Dan, can I ask a question? Is it okay,
go right
DJ?
ahead. Go right ahead.
I saw a Bull Island poster not too long ago. A friend of mine who lives over in Golden Gate, of all places, has a big Bull Island poster. And for some reason, it sticks in my mind the word strawberry was at one point in the name of this festival. Strawberry Soda Pop Festival? Or am I just dreaming that?
I hadn't heard.
It may have been on the poster, Strawberry Soda Pop Festival.
Well, they came up with all kinds of names for this.
But for some reason, that stuck in my mind.
They kind of, I guess, they kind of glorify it as some kind of a family event or
It was,
something.
it was
That was the whole idea, I think.
Oh, sure.
To call it the Soda Pop Festival and call the other one the Ice Cream Social.
Oh, yes.
And just try to, go over what really was a big drug party.
Well, I think that was the PR campaign.
Oh, yes, yes.
Just try to get it on, definitely. Now, the Bull Island Boogie, the lyrics are interesting here. I'm going to just read the beginning of it here. 300,000 people jammed up in the road trying to find a place they could see the boogie show. Move over, brother. Won't you let this van on through? We trucked up from Tennessee to bring some songs to you. With an axle hitting bottom from the riders on the top. We came to do it for you. Who knows when it will stop? Then the chorus, boogie boogie to Bull Island, boogie boogie just as hard as you can. And that's true. People
That's true.
were
They were on top of vans. They were riding on trunks, riding on hoods, hanging out of windows. I mean,
Yep.
any way you could get
on.
there.
Yeah.
And nobody was telling you to get off the vehicle. Everybody was. These are all hippies. Let's go to the festival.
Yep.
Any way you can get there.
So there was a sense of familiarity with all the people there, Dan?
Yeah. I didn't see.
Did you feel like you were part of the group?
Yeah, everybody was having a good time. I just didn't see any violence.
Did you ever feel unsafe?
No. The only real violence I saw, really, and it wasn't intentional, some guy kept climbing up on one of the light towers and was mooning the crowd. and the announcer said, get him off of there. Well, their idea of getting him off there was to throw bottles at him. Well, the bottles come down somewhere.
And they bust.
Yeah. So they had to tell him to cut that out before anybody got hurt.
Oh my God.
But that, other than that, I didn't see anything else there that was, dangerous.
And there really was no police presence at the
No.
site.
Again, they were just there in case something really, really, really went bad, and they'd call in the reinforcements.
So
And the only way they could come in is by chopper anyway.
Yeah.
They weren't making any drug arrests at the site?
Nah, not that I was aware of.
Just
no.
outside later they did. But
They made some arrests, I know, as people were going home, and
Yeah.
even in other states, there were some. I do know that there were undercover people in there doing reconnaissance and stuff like that. And it did result in some arrests later on down the road after the festival, as in dealers.
And I understand that there was some footage taken, some film taken at the site. Lynn?
But
And the state police like to show this occasionally.
They would. They kind of would call it a stag night, I guess you'd call it, show, because people were uninhibited. They didn't mind whether they had their clothes on or not. So there you go.
Well, that's just part of their
Surveillance videos.
That's right, surveillance
It was
video.
strictly for police work. Strictly police work.
Here's another segment from the song. We set up our town tent city out behind the stand, shared a case of warm fall city with other bands. Out in the front, the heat's uncannon something for the stone. We're running out of beer back here, man. When do we go on? Marooned on an island, we've got no place to go. We have to take a chopper for to leave this rock and roll and all this. Boogie boogie with the Bull Island Band. Boogie boogie just as hard as you can. Yes, good stuff here. And you have some great comments from the folks here that went there, and you've got these all through your book, and you kind of paste this. Deborah P. writes, we met a young woman who we discovered lived near us up in New York State. She was filthy and out of it. We hitchhiked home, kept her under our wing, and when we delivered her to her front door, her mother was horrified. Yeah. Sounds like what your parents
Pretty close, yeah.
were horrified. And the canned heat drummer Adolfo Fido de la Parra told an interviewer, "We were so high, I can't remember if we did get paid." He went on to say, "It was the biggest disaster we ever played, but I have sympathy for the promoters who were trying to create another Woodstock." I mean, they did their best. They tried.
Yeah, and they had to do it in a hurry at a location they didn't really pick to go to.
Yeah.
So, to do something on a spur of the moment like that, they really did a pretty good job.
Now, Ted Nugent was among the performers. I bet that was wild.
Yeah.
Rodney B. recalls Ted Nugent waking everybody up at the crack of dawn with his high-octane nonsense. Another festival goer says he remembers being bored with Ravi Shankar and watching Nugent shooting flaming arrows into his amps, wearing a loincloth, and acting like Tarzan on stage.
And he started in the middle of the night, Ted Nugent did, and I ended up falling asleep in the tent. And when I woke up at sunrise, Ted was still performing.
Oh, dear.
So he was on stage for a long time.
He must have had some performance-enhancing drugs or something.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, and you might know these people, Lynn. Pam from Carmi, Illinois. It was the first time I had seen naked people taking a bath in dirty water.
That's true.
Kara from Grayville.
I know her already.
I was 8 or 9.
She would have been.
My dad and one of his friends took me in on the John boat. Dad had his hands over my eyes the whole time.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I know Kara. I know exactly who you're talking about.
That's funny. Gary W., we went skinny dipping in the Wabash, and one of the guys in our group got run over by a boat. The propeller nearly cut off his foot. He was taken to the hospital by boat and later fully recovered. Okay, we talked about that. We did have a drowning, is that correct?
A woman, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a woman. And I think she tried to swim over from the other side.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
And tell the story about the lady that was run over in a sleeping bag.
Yeah, there's a girl there. She'd just gotten there, and she was sleeping in a sleeping bag. She saw it in an open area, but the area turned out to be an area that people had been driving through. And when a truck pulled out, it ran her over. Cheech and Chong got word of it. They even said that there's been a chick run over by a truck. We need to get her to
probably a song in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And everybody kind of I guess they handed her over the top of the crowd.
Right.
Passed her over the top, and got her to the hospital, but she survived.
What a deal.
Definitely. And somebody said he saw people water skiing naked on the Wabash.
I saw that myself
you did
on
see
one of the trips down there in my brother's boat.
Oh, that's a memory, definitely.
Oh yeah, precious memory.
Oh,
for sure.
guys, I tell you. Now, what's going on at Bull Island now? Has anybody ever been there? Has it recovered?
Actually, I was back there in April. There was a filmmaker doing a documentary on it. I was helping him. And
was there much to shoot? There surely wasn't.
It's pretty overgrown.
I thought.
Yeah, they did mow a section out there right near where the stage used to be, and they brought me down there to film and talk about it a little bit.
And the cleanup after Bull Island must have been incredible.
They used a bulldozer and all the human...
I think they just disked a lot of it in to the ground, just disked it.
And I guess they charged the promoters $20,000. They billed them $20,000 for the cleanup, and of course, they never paid it.
Oh, no.
Well, I know after the festival, there was all kinds of lawsuits.
That was the question I was going to ask, how many lawsuits there were.
The vendors, the investors, the IRS, the Wookiee Music Company sued because they rented a piano, and it was on the stage, and the people that were left over after all the bands were done were using it for a toilet.
Oh, man.
And there was a farmer that sued because he had some cows die, and he claimed it was from marijuana smoke inhalation.
Happy cow.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Well, there was one story about festivalers, they butchered a cow or something?
They butchered it, but it doesn't seem like they knew what they were doing. I guess it was all butchered.
Kind of probably more of a Manson deal than anything.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it had to have been pretty gruesome.
I bet it was.
And you told me since you've written this book, more stories have surfaced.
Oh, I've heard from a lot of people, and a lot of my friends, found I wrote the book, and they'll say, you should have talked to me. And I had no idea you were there, you know.
But the Wabash River it's muddy. I mean, there's nothing clean or pristine about it. It's like the Mississippi. It's the muddy Mississippi. It's muddy Wabash.
Yeah.
And they were bathing in muddy water.
Yeah.
But I guess it still felt more refreshing than being grungy.
Well, that's my vivid memory of Bull Island. Is just it was filthy. The people were filthy. Some of them looked pretty miserable when I saw them, and it was a mess. It was just an absolute
Even the people
mess.
swimming didn't look like they were having a great time.
No, it just seemed like it was kind of a depressing area.
Yeah.
But we weren't there when the bands were playing, and
that's
everybody
true.
was hooting
That's
and
true.
hollering.
And I wasn't high.
No,
either,
me
so
neither.
I guess. No, so anyway, Bull Island, people went there. They had a good time. Almost everybody survived.
Just about.
to relate their stories 50 years later. Well, memories from Bull Island from three old guys who were there. I hope we haven't bored our audience.
Oh, I doubt it.
My thanks to Dan Davis and Lynn Wells. I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street.